The rise of the Japanese Empire was one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern world history. Within just a few decades, Japan evolved from an isolated feudal society into one of the most formidable military and industrial powers the world had ever seen. Its empire stretched across East Asia and the Pacific, challenging the great Western powers and reshaping the balance of power in the first half of the 20th century. To understand how powerful the Japanese Empire truly was, one must trace its roots from the Meiji Restoration of the late 19th century to its final destruction in the flames of World War II. In the early 19th century, Japan was a secluded nation under the Tokugawa shogunate. It had been closed off from most foreign influence for more than 2 centuries under the Sakoku policy. The Japanese people were largely agrarian, with a rigid social hierarchy dominated by samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants. The emperor remained a symbolic figure in Kyoto while the shogun ruled from Edo, now Tokyo. Western powers had been industrializing rapidly, carving empires across Asia and Africa. When Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with his black ships in 1853, demanding that Japan open its ports to trade with the United States, the country faced a crisis it could no longer ignore. The forced opening of Japan shattered the illusion of isolation. The unequal treaties imposed by Western powers humiliated Japanese elites, convincing them that Japan must modernize or risk colonization like China or India. Out of this realization was born the Meiji Restoration of 1868, a revolution that restored imperial authority under Emperor Meiji and launched a sweeping program of modernization. The Meiji leaders were driven by a single goal: to make Japan strong enough to stand as an equal among the Western powers. They abolished the feudal system, centralized political power, reformed taxation, built a national army, and introduced compulsory education. Samurai privileges were dismantled, replaced by a modern bureaucracy loyal to the emperor. The government sent missions abroad, such as the famous Iwakura mission, to study Western technology, industry, and institutions. They imported foreign experts, built railways and telegraph lines, established shipyards and arsenals, and encouraged private enterprise. Within decades, Japan transformed from a pre-industrial society into a rapidly industrializing nation. By the late 19th century, Japan's modernization began to bear fruit. The new Imperial Japanese Army and Navy were modeled after European powers, the Army after Prussia and the Navy after Britain. With modern weapons, discipline, and training, Japan soon sought to test its strength. The first opportunity came in 1894 with the First Sino-Japanese War. China, under the declining Qing dynasty, still claimed suzerainty over Korea. Japan, seeking to expand its influence, intervened. The conflict was short and decisive. Japan's modernized forces crushed the Chinese army and navy. The victory shocked the world. In the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, China recognized Korea's independence, ceded Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands to Japan, and paid a massive indemnity. For the first time, an Asian nation had defeated a major European-influenced empire. This victory marked Japan's arrival as a regional power, but it also created tensions with Western powers. When Russia, Germany, and France forced Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula to China in what was called the Triple Intervention, the Japanese public was outraged. National pride demanded revenge and further expansion. The Japanese leadership focused next on building even greater military and industrial strength. Within 10 years, Japan would face its greatest test yet against a European empire. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905 was one of the most significant conflicts of the early 20th century. Russia sought to expand its influence in Manchuria and Korea, clashing with Japan's ambitions. Despite being vastly outnumbered and facing one of the world's largest empires, Japan struck first with a surprise attack on Port Arthur, similar to its later attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese army achieved a series of victories in Manchuria, including the monumental Battle of Mukden, while the Navy annihilated the Russian fleet at the Battle of Tsushima. The world was stunned. An Asian power had defeated a European empire for the first time in modern history. Japan's prestige soared, inspiring anti-colonial movements across Asia and Africa. Through the Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, Japan gained control of Korea, southern Manchuria, and the southern half of Sakhalin Island. It also secured recognition of its dominance in Korea. which it formally annexed in 1910. By this point, the Japanese Empire had become the dominant power in East Asia. Its industrial base was growing rapidly, fueled by heavy industry, textiles, shipbuilding, and armaments. Japan's economy was increasingly export-driven, its navy one of the largest in the world, and its army professional and battle-tested. Japan's participation in World War I further expanded its reach. When the war broke out in 1914, Japan sided with the Allies, quickly seizing German possessions in the Pacific, including the Marshall, Mariana, and Caroline Islands, and Germany's leasehold in China's Shandong province. Japan used the opportunity to assert its power in China, issuing the 21 Demands in 1915, which sought to expand its control over Chinese territories and economy. Although Western powers resisted some of these demands, Japan had clearly established itself as a major imperial power by the war's end. In the interwar period, Japan continued to grow industrially and militarily. The 1920s saw both prosperity and tension. On one hand, Japan joined the League of Nations and signed treaties aimed at limiting naval armaments, such as the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922. On the other hand, economic hardship from the Great Depression in the 1930s and nationalist resentment led to growing militarism. Civilian governments became increasingly dominated by the military, which viewed expansion as essential for Japan's survival. Japan's economy, though advanced, lacked natural resources like oil, coal, and iron. This scarcity made expansion into resource-rich territories a strategic necessity for Japan's imperial planners. The military viewed Manchuria, with its vast natural wealth, as vital to Japan's independence from Western economic dominance. In 1931, Japanese officers staged the Mukden incident, using it as a pretext to invade Manchuria. The invasion was swift, and within months, Japan had established the puppet state of Manchukuo, installing the last Qing emperor, Puyi, as its figurehead. The League of Nations condemned the aggression, but Japan simply withdrew from the League, defying international opinion. By the mid-1930s, Japan's militarism had reached full force. Political assassinations, coups, and nationalist propaganda reinforced the ideology of expansion and emperor worship. Japan's military leaders envisioned a vast empire in Asia, the so-called Greater East Asia, co-prosperity sphere where Japan would dominate, economically and politically under the guise of liberating Asia from Western colonialism. In 1937, this vision turned into full-scale war when Japan invaded China. The Second Sino-Japanese War became one of the bloodiest conflicts in history. Japanese forces captured major cities such as Shanghai, Nanjing, and Wuhan, committing horrific atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. Despite its brutality, Japan's military machine appeared unstoppable. Its army was large, disciplined, and technologically advanced for its time. The Imperial Japanese Navy was one of the world's most powerful fleets, possessing modern aircraft carriers, battleships, and submarines. Japan's industrial output surged, producing ships, aircraft, and munitions at a massive scale. By 1940, Japan had allied with Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Pact, forming the Axis powers. With Europe engulfed in war, Japan saw an opportunity to expand further into Southeast Asia and the Pacific, targeting Western colonies weakened by conflict. In 1941, Japan made the fateful decision to attack the United States and its allies. Facing embargoes on oil and other vital materials imposed by the US, Britain, and the Netherlands, Japan sought to secure resources in the Dutch East Indies and Southeast Asia. To do so, it needed to neutralize the US Pacific Fleet. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, destroying or damaging much of the American fleet. Within months, Japan swept across the Pacific, conquering the Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies. Its empire stretched from Manchuria to New Guinea, from the Aleutian Islands to the Indian Ocean. Never before had Japan possessed such vast power and territory. At its height, the Japanese Empire controlled more than 7 million square kilometers and over 150 million people. Its military forces numbered in the millions, supported by one of the world's largest navies and air forces. Japan's industrial base was geared entirely toward war, with factories churning out ships, planes, and weapons. The Imperial Army was feared for its discipline and ferocity, though also infamous for its cruelty. Japanese propaganda portrayed the empire as a liberator of Asia from Western imperialism, but in reality, its rule was often brutal, marked by forced labor, massacres, and exploitation. However, Japan's rise had also planted the seeds of its downfall. Its rapid conquests overstretched its resources, and its industrial base, though powerful, could not match the sheer production capacity of the United States. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a turning point. The U.S. Navy destroyed 4 of Japan's fleet carriers, crippling its offensive capability. From that point onward, Japan was on the defensive. American forces began a relentless island-hopping campaign, recapturing territory and closing in on the Japanese homeland. By 1944, Japan's situation had become desperate. Its navy was largely destroyed, its cities were being bombed relentlessly, and its supply lines were cut off. The once mighty empire that had terrified Asia was collapsing. Yet Japan refused to surrender. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa demonstrated the fanaticism of Japanese resistance, with soldiers and civilians alike fighting to the death. Japan's leaders hoped that inflicting heavy casualties on the Allies might lead to a negotiated peace. But the United States had developed a weapon unlike any seen before. In August 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 200,000 people. At the same time, the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, annihilating the Japanese Kwantung Army. Faced with total annihilation, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. The once glorious Japanese Empire was no more. After the war, Japan was occupied by Allied forces led by the United States. Its empire was dismantled, its military disbanded, and its government restructured under a new constitution that renounced war. The emperor retained his throne but lost all political power. The empire that had sought to dominate Asia was reduced to its home islands, devastated and demoralized. Yet even in defeat, Japan's resilience was remarkable. Within a few decades, it rose again, not as a military power, but as an economic giant. The legacy of the Japanese Empire remains complex. On one hand, it demonstrated how rapid modernization and national unity could transform a nation from feudal isolation to global power within a few generations. On the other hand, it showed the dangers of militarism, nationalism, and imperial ambition. Japan's empire left deep scars across Asia, from Korea to China to the Philippines, through forced labor, atrocities, and exploitation. The memories of those years continue to shape Japan's relations with its neighbors. In assessing how powerful the Japanese Empire was, historians often note its paradoxical nature. Militarily, it was among the most formidable powers of its time. Its navy rivaled those of the United States and Britain, its army conquered vast territories, and its industry supported years of total war. Yet its power was fragile, built on limited natural resources and sustained by ruthless expansion. Once cut off from resources and trade, its empire collapsed swiftly. The Japanese Empire's story is one of ambition, discipline, and tragedy. It rose from isolation to greatness through vision and determination, defied the world's strongest empires, and then fell through the same forces of arrogance and aggression that had fueled its rise. Its power was immense, but its downfall was inevitable once it challenged the industrial might of the United States and the combined forces of the Allies. Still, the empire's rise remains a testament to the extraordinary capability of Japan's people to adapt, innovate, and fight with unmatched spirit. From the ashes of defeat, Japan would rebuild into a peaceful, prosperous nation, proving that power does not always come from conquest, but from endurance and renewal. The empire that once sought to dominate Asia ultimately taught the world a profound lesson: that even the most powerful military machine cannot sustain itself against the tide of humanity's yearning for peace and freedom.